on this early Monday morning. We're going to sing some songs to invite God to be here with us this morning. He's already here. But let's draw close to Him this morning and this time. Let no one caught in sin remain inside the lie of inward shame, but fix our eyes upon the cross and run to Him who showed great love and bled for us, freely bled for us. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling over death by death. Come awake, come and rise up from the grave. Christ is risen from the dead, we are one with Him again. Come awake, come and rise up from the grave. Beneath the weight of all our sin, you bow to none but heaven's will. No scheme of hell, no scoffer's crown, no burden great can hold you down. In strength you reign forever, let your church proclaim. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling over death by death. Come awake, come and rise up from the grave. Christ is risen from the dead, we are one with Him again. Come awake, come and rise up from the grave. Oh, death, where is your sting? Oh, hell, where is your victory? Oh, church, come stand in the light. Glory of God has defeated the night. Oh, death, where is your sting? Oh, hell, where is your victory? Oh, church, come stand in the light. Our God is not dead, He's alive, He's alive. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling over death by death. Come and rise up from the grave. Christ is risen from the dead, we are one with Him again. Come and rise up from the grave. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling over death by death. Come and rise up from the grave. Christ is risen from the dead, we are one with Him again. Come and rise up from the grave. At this point, I want to say some thank yous because I feel like they're highly appropriate. I want to thank Lisa for putting the slides together for us every set. She has been amazing. I love her. And she's put up with us switching things out and changing things around and been very patient. And Dan, back at the board, you have been fantastic to us. Thank you for your care. And I have to say, thank you to my team. These are not just my team, they're my friends. And I couldn't have done it without them this week. Love you guys, so thank you. We'll continue singing together. Is Lindsay here with us this morning? Oh, awesome. I just want to make sure that we have, are you able to come and hang out with us for a minute for this one? Okay. We'll vamp for a moment. And thanks to Lindsay and Natalie for helping us with all of our French lyrics this week. They have been fantastic to us as well. So. Oh, this is. What a friend we have in Jesus. Our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear. All because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. Happy trials and temptations. Is there trouble anywhere? We should never be discouraged. Take to the Lord in prayer. Can we find a friend so faithful?
Climbing high mountains, trying to get home. We're climbing high mountains trying to get home. We're climbing high mountains, Lord, I'm climbing high mountains trying to get home. Sometimes you try to get home.
You can have a seat. I'd like to invite Dennis to come up and share with us this morning.
Well, good morning, friends. I am Dennis, and I'm one of 3 people who will be presenting during this devotional time this morning. I think the theme of this general conference has been a wonderful one. What an encouragement it has been to be reminded in so many ways that we have all that we need for life and godliness, which obviously includes ministry. And now as we will soon transition to be going home, I'm sure we will do so with this dynamic promise ringing in our hearts and minds, with a resolve to more fully live it out as we go back to the context of our churches in the communities across this nation. Our purpose as a devotional team is to give some evidence of this great promise by way of personal testimony. Is it true that we have all that we need? Is it really true? Now, I understand that I have been chosen to be part of this team mainly because of my age. You see, I can look back over a long number of years, a long association with the church, well into 5 decades of ministry of one sort or another. And as I look back over that span, what do I see? Well, like Elizabeth Barrett Browning in her poem with the question, "How do I love thee?" she says, "Let me count the ways." And so I would like this morning to to ask the question, is it true that we have all that we need? And in the short time that we have together as a team, we want to say yes in as many ways as we can. Now, I need to be honest. As I look back over my life and ministry, there have been lots of times when I have been conscious of lack. Times when I have thought, I don't have what I need. I don't have what the church needs. I didn't get what the other guy got. Sounds like complaining, doesn't it? And I've done my share of that, I'm sure. More than once I've asked the question, how could God use the limited stuff that He gave me? Now, in practical terms, and I have to confess, using labels, which after last evening I was a little hesitant to do, but using labels, the question really means, how could God use a right to the extreme edge of the scale introvert like me, especially when there are so many loud, exuberant, gregarious, in-your-face, and apparently talented extroverts around, and a few normal people in between? I guess I was a bit like Moses, just a little bit like him, in that I questioned God about His wisdom in asking me to do something for Him and with people, or maybe I just struggled with His extreme sense of humor. But like Moses, again, I began to discover that if we give back to God what He has given to us, He will give back to us all that we need so that we can give back to Him the service that He wanted from us in the first place. I did have a few things in my hand that I was able to give over to God to see what He would do with them. Even as a child and teenager, I had a desire to hear and understand the voice of God. And when I gave that over to Him, and when I listened carefully, God gave me a call. It came gently. God was patient. He moved me at a pace that I could follow. The call began to consolidate as Wilda and I, newly married, took on teaching positions on a First Nations community in beautiful Lake of the Woods area of northwestern Ontario. And for 2 years, we lived with the people there, with parents and their children of Shoal Lake bands 39 and 40. We had no clue at that time how to relate to people in a different culture, but God gave us the capacity to learn quickly and well, and it felt good to intentionally act in obedience to the Lord's clear leading. I remember the best articulation of that call that I had the courage to verbalize at that time was, I felt I was called to Christian service. A little later, I added the descriptors full-time Christian service because I wanted people to understand that I would need to get paid. But I kept it vague. I guess that was about all I knew at the time. Something else in my hand was a willingness to prepare. And when I gave that to God, Wilda and I set out for Roberts Wesleyan College, not knowing how we would finance the venture or pull it off. But during those 4 years, God gave us what we needed. And besides, we gained great life experiences that, more than we knew, prepared us for the adventure of ministry that would unfold ahead of us. In and through it all, God gave me a servant's heart, a willingness to serve, as long as He would clearly show us where He wanted us to serve. As we lived that out, giving it over to God, and I have to say we, because Wilda has always been and still is a vital, supportive part of anything I've done in ministry. So by now, in Saskatchewan, we served as house parents in a children's home, in a group home operated by a home missions part of the Canadian Conference, known at that time as Canadian Indian Mission. It was one of the worst jobs I had ever had. I mean, it was basically 24/7. unfulfilling for me at least, 23:6. But it was during that time that some pastoral and conference leaders who had not known me for very long, but who observed, identified, and affirmed that I had what they called a pastor's heart. So I offered that to God. Along with that, God had given me a willingness to settle in for the long haul, and thus we enjoyed 20 of some of the best years of our lives as pastor in a little but eventually growing church in Prince Albert. You see, our lives are written in chapters, and for me, each chapter has been wonderful in its time, wonderfully supplied by God's abundant giving. One great chapter provided opportunities to lead and superintend on conference levels. And there, as usual, I didn't come to the job with training and experience, but God supplied what was needed, mostly through working with teams of people who brought their gifts and experience into the mix. The last 12 years have provided 10 wonderful opportunities to help churches during the struggles of pastoral transitions. And it's been great. I love it when I can help a church move in the direction of greater health. I love it when I see the church come under new, younger leadership and begin to write a new ministry chapter that aligns with vision and strategy shaped in the trenches of transition. Is it really true that God gives us what we need for life and godliness? Yes. Yes, and again, I would say yes. And the good news is this, friends. He is still supplying. And on good days, I'm still learning. I'm amazed at how much God shows us, how much God continues to give to us.
Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship his holy name. Sing like never before.
Good morning. I am Jennifer Wager, and I'm from the Barrie Free Methodist Church. And over the past 16 plus years of ministry, I have come to learn that my identity cannot be found in my church or my ministry, my family or my friends, my education or my connections, as good as those connections are. I have learned that my identity can only be rooted in Christ alone, because only in Him do I find everything I need to live and move and breathe. I've had to learn to keep my eyes on Jesus, because when your church goes into transition 3 times in 7 years, when the thunder of a church split comes crashing in around you, and when the temptation to speak against the leadership seems overwhelming, I needed to remind myself, don't jump ship, don't despair, don't lose hope, and don't give in. I needed to learn to keep my eyes on Jesus, to turn to Him, to look for Him, because when I sought Him, I found Him, and I discovered that He really was all I needed. And then when I went into transition, I really had to start believing that He really was all I needed. And I needed to begin to trust the words I said when asked, "So what are you going to do now?" And I would simply reply with both faith and some desperate hope, "I don't know, but God knows that I need to eat, and I have to have a warm place to live, and I need gas for my car because He placed me here in Canada." And wow, did He change that fast. He lifted me out of Canada and placed me in England for a year, where I didn't have to worry about feeding myself or a warm place to live or gas for my car, as I did a prayer ministry training school for that year. Now, before I left for England, I told Him, I needed 3 things. I needed a good room, a good roommate, and good friends. And wow, He did so with amazing abundance. I was so blessed. And then the Lord said to me in that still, quiet voice, "So now that I've looked after those details, can we look at your heart?" Okay, was basically how it came out. And through the course of the next 10 months, the Lord revealed lies that I had believed were truth, which affected the way I thought about myself and others. And it was only when I confessed to believing those lies that He broke the power that they had in my life. And I was truly set free to believe His truth, that He really was all I needed. It was during this time of transition that I learned to trust God with every detail of my life, truly believing that He was all I needed, because I had to learn to submit everything to Him. And during this time, I made a profound discovery. God did not create me to do something. He created me to be someone. And that someone was His daughter, whom He says, "I love you, I 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 love you, and all I have is yours." Wow. This mind-blowing knowledge that I came to understand was life-altering. He created me just because He wanted to love me. Not to be a pastor, not to be a teacher. He created me just because He wanted to, because He wanted to love me. It was during this time I began to understand that nothing was impossible for God. Before I left for England, I had only the money to pay for 2 of the 4 terms of the training, and yet through teeth-clenching trust in the Lord, He provided sponsorships and secret donors that enabled me to stay the entire 4 terms, including 2 missions trips and a conference. I also saw God move with His healing power in the lives of my family. I was truly amazed to watch what God did when I was out of the way and could no longer meddle in what He wanted to do. So there I was, loving parachurch ministry. And then it happened. My plans to remain doing this literally blew up in my face with the click of one email. And there I was on my face in front of the Lord saying, "So, what's the plan now? And it didn't take long because within a month, an interim position became available at the Barrie Church. And I was ticked off. I didn't want to work in a church. I didn't want to work in a city. I didn't want to work with youth. And I certainly didn't want to follow Pastor Rick because he was a good friend. And I just had too much admiration for him and his ministry to want to follow him. And so I'm like, Lord, you've got to be joking me. And the Lord simply said, you go, and I will do the ministry. So it's now been 2.5 years since I've been at the Barrie Church, and God has once again provided an amazing home, an amazing roommate, wonderful friends, totally great and amazing ministry partners. Yeah, see, they're wonderful. And he has been true to his word. I cannot begin to count the times when nothing seemed to be going right, that I was totally ticked off and not impressed that I had to be there. And then he would step in and he would do the ministry again and again and again. So in all of these transitions, I have learned that I need to stay as close to Jesus as possible, surrendering everything that I have, because when the blockages are removed, I am more likely to hear his voice and be comforted by his presence. I have come to learn that the Lord knows what is at the root cause of all of my issues, and he still loves me. But something actually that I've come to learn more and more is that he loves you too, and he knows your issues, and he still desires to be with you. And as a pastor, that was like a wow moment. I'm like, he genuinely loves that person I'm talking to. Okay, I guess I need to love them too. Thirdly, I need to be obedient. Even though I do not always want to do what God wants me to do, or it may not be very comfortable, I have to believe that in obedience, a blessing waits that cannot be gained by following my own desires. Finally, and this is probably the most important, I have learned that I'm a daughter of the King. And no matter what I do, or how often I make mistakes, or I grumble, or I complain, he loves me. 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 And what's even important that I've come to learn is he loves you. 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 And in that love, we truly have everything we need.
Christ alone, my hope is found. dead. This is the power of Christ in me. From life's first cry to final breath, Jesus commands my destiny. No power of hell, no scheme of man can ever pluck me from his hand till he returns or calls me home. Here in the power of Christ I stand till he returns or calls me home. Here in the power of Christ I stand. Amen. You can have a seat.
Morning, everyone. It's a privilege to be up here alongside Dennis and Jen this morning, and I was chosen to be here because of the three of us. I'm the one who's still a little bit or quite a bit wet behind the ears. I still have many moments of those deer in the headlights, kind of feeling that way this morning. I'm in my first pastorate in Sudbury a few years in, and I just want to take a few moments to share some of my experiences related to the theme of this weekend. I'm under no illusions this morning that I'm the wisest nor the best looking of the three of us, but I hope you'll agree that maybe I'm the best dressed this morning. And if not, Leafs fans, Habs fans, or Leafs fans, Bruins fans, Rangers fans, you can thank me for allowing us to practice what we talked about last night this morning. The last few years in ministry, I've been learning a lot. I still have a long way to go, much to learn. And one thing I've been learning is that sometimes the things I think I need, according to my mind, are not the things that God knows I truly need in the moments I go to Him in prayer. And so I want to talk a little bit this morning about identity, much as we did last evening, but taking the mirror and not turning it outward on how we see people, but turning it inward to look at how we see ourselves. And my backstory, for many years of my life, my identity was wrapped up in how well I performed on a basketball court, how well I perform behind a pulpit such as this. There were actually days where my mood would be severely altered on a Sunday morning depending on how my beloved Montreal Canadiens performed the night before. I think I've overcome that. I was pretty cheery on Sunday morning, regardless of the pounding they took Saturday night. But those are all, we can laugh at that and say they're frivolous things, but those were areas in my life where too much of my identity was wrapped up, and I was getting too much life from those areas. And entering into ministry, although I was able to overcome some of those false sources of identity, God really revealed to me that I was still getting too much life from the affirmation of others, too much life from how well I perceived I was performing and all the roles and responsibilities as a pastor and a leader that were given. And this time last year, I just want to share briefly a testimony about a couple things that God put in my path to help me work on my own identity in those areas. This time last year, two things happened. One which many of you will see as normal, one which some of you will see as abnormal. I'm an ENFP, with the emphasis on F. How many other Fs in the room? A few of you? All you Ts, just buckle up. This is going to sound a little strange for the next few minutes. But we had just finished at our church a couple of years ago going through God's Grace Channels material, which is available online. Dan, you can thank me later for that plug. And I was just sensing the need to explore some different means of grace, some different ways to connect and to commune with Abba. And so I was just entering into, I'd done some other reading and entering into some what I call imaginative times of prayer. Times where I would just get away in a quiet space or go for a stroll in a wonderful place and just take some time just to connect with Abba, just to commune, and actually just invite Jesus to meet me in those times of prayer. And God speaks in our imaginations, He speaks in our minds, certainly. And so I would spend moments doing that. And I would repeatedly find myself in my mind's eye at the same place. It was a fond childhood place. It was at the end of a dock on a lake in New Liskeard where I would go visit my grandparents growing up. place where I caught a few fish and just had some wonderful times. And I would see myself in these times of prayer, just the young little boy, Jason, sitting at the end of the dock, fishing line in hand. And then along would stroll Jesus down that dock, and he would sit alongside me, he would meet me, he would just put one arm around me, and he would simply say these words, "You are my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And that's all I would hear, time and time again. And it initially was very frustrating for me. I was thinking in these times of prayer, I would get some fresh revelation on reconciling the divine violent passages of the Old Testament with the Jesus of the New Testament. That's what I thought I wanted and needed. I thought I would get some fresh revelation into solving the mystery of the problem of suffering and evil in the world. Or at least some new fresh artillery for those no-holds-barred debates against our Reformed Calvinist brothers and sisters. You see, that's what I thought I needed in those moments. And it took me a while for it to sink in. I know what I truly needed. What I really needed was to hear those words. "You are my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And as Jen mentioned this morning, maybe some of us need to hear those words before we leave this weekend. We're taking notes and we're thinking of strategies and all these things we need to do. And there's some very profound things each of us need to do in our ministry context. But in the midst of the doing, may we take many moments to hear those words of affirmation from the voice that really, truly matters, the voice of the Good Shepherd, saying, "You are my beloved Son, you are my beloved daughter, in whom I'm well pleased." So that was the first of two experiences that were very transformative in my life this time last year. The other was a book I came across from one of my longtime pod pastors, a young pastor by the name of Jonathan Martin. He wrote a book last year entitled Prototype. I commend it to you. It's excellent. And it was echoing much of what God was saying to me in those times of prayer. The thesis of Martin's book is simply this, that although Jesus is perfectly divine, he is also the prototypical human. And one thing that makes Jesus the perfect human is that in that wonderful story we read in Luke's Gospel, in Luke chapter 3, at Jesus' baptism, when there he is identifying with us sinners lined up that day. And he goes down into the water, and the sky parts, and he hears those words that I was hearing. Even Jesus, I believe in his humanity, to some degree needed to hear those words of affirmation from Abba. "You are my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Jonathan Martin, in his book, writes this about that encounter Jesus had that day. He said, "When Jesus emerged from the water, the sky opened, and the Spirit of God descended on him like a dove. And then came the voice, 'This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased.' These were the words of God himself, and though only a handful, they were the most important words that Jesus would ever hear. These words were spoken before the oppressed and diseased were healed. They were spoken before he preached the Sermon on the Mount. They were spoken before he turned water into wine or walked on water. They were words he would remember when his body was shutting down after 40 days in the wilderness. They were words he'd remember when the crowds were shouting his name and singing to him as if he were Caesar. They were words he'd remember when his best friends betrayed and abandoned him. They were words he'd remember when his body was mangled and his beard was plucked out. The day would come when chunks of flesh would hang from his body and his lungs would collapse. His body would be crushed, but the words would still remain. 'You are my Son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased.'" Perhaps maybe some of us, like me, need to hear those words today as we prepare to go back to the calling, to our communities. And like Jonathan Martin, I believe that one thing that separates Jesus from us is that when he heard those words, he believed them, and not once did he forget. And unlike Jesus, I can only speak for myself. I have moments of amnesia where I still continue to forget those words, those most important words. And so for me this morning and this weekend, it's a chance to remember that although I think I need things, what I really need is to hear those words, and then to go and live and do the ministry he's called me and us to, out of the overflow of those words. I find it very interesting as well that in 2 Peter, if we zoom out from the passage we've been focusing on in chapter 1, Peter actually pens these words. He says in verse 17 and 18, he says, "When we received honor and glory from God the Father, the voice from the majestic God of glory said to him, 'This is my dearly loved Son, who brings me great joy.'" And he says this, he says in verse 18, "We ourselves heard that voice from heaven when we were with him on that holy mountain." Peter heard those words when he was with Jesus. On the journey, as we walk alongside Jesus, I pray that we will hear those words much like Peter did early and often. "You are my beloved Son, you are my beloved daughter, in whom I am well pleased." By his divine power, God has given us everything we need for living a godly life. We have received all of this by coming to know him, the one who called us to himself by means of his glory and excellence. And let's just focus on verse 4 as we wind down this morning. "And because of his glory and excellence, he has given us great and precious promises. These are the promises that enable you to share his divine nature and escape the world's corruption caused by human desires." We're going to cue up a video right now, and we're just going to meditate upon some of those great and precious promises we receive as beloved sons and daughters. Let's watch this, and we'll just take a minute to reflect in silence.